We spend our lives running from suffering, yet deep down, could it be that we secretly need it? This is the haunting question posed by Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, a work that dives into the darkest corners of human psychology. It's not just the story of a bitter, isolated man, it's a mirror reflecting why we resist happiness and cling to pain, even when it destroys us. Dostoevsky's Underground Man challenges everything we think we know about suffering. For him, pain isn't just an affliction. It's proof of freedom, rebellion, and meaning. As we explore his world, we'll uncover why suffering shapes us in ways joy never can, and why this truth remains as relevant today as it was in Dostoevsky's time. The Underground Man is not just a character in Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, he is an embodiment of raw, unfiltered humanity. Disillusioned and trapped in his own mind, he isolates himself from society, choosing a self-imposed exile over the vulnerability of connection. Yet, this isolation is not peaceful. It's a battleground where his intellect and emotions clash. He despises the world and his suffering, yet paradoxically clings to it, finding in his pain a twisted sense of identity. This paradox makes the Underground Man more than a tragic figure. It makes him relatable. Haven't we all at some point wallowed in our misery, feeling both victimized and superior? He resents the very things he secretly craves: connection, recognition, purpose, because admitting these desires would mean exposing his own weaknesses. It's a cycle that feels deeply familiar. The push and pull between wanting to belong and rejecting the vulnerability it requires. His contradictions echo our own struggles with pride, fear, and self-sabotage. But the most unsettling revelation is this: the Underground Man isn't an anomaly, he's a mirror. He reflects the hidden corners of our psyche where we harbor resentment, nurture grudges, and reject joy because it feels undeserved. His story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the barriers we put up to protect ourselves from pain often become the very sources of it. What does it say about us that we can see ourselves in his torment? And why does his suffering feel so disturbingly human? Dostoevsky reveals a profound truth in Notes from Underground. Happiness, as much as we claim to seek it, often feels shallow and unfulfilling. The Underground Man rejects happiness because it seems prepackaged, devoid of depth and authenticity. He sees it as a script written by society, predictable, sterile, and ultimately meaningless. His resistance to joy is not born of ignorance, but of a deep awareness that happiness, as defined by the world, often fails to address the complexities of human existence. Psychologically, this resistance stems from the control that suffering provides. Pain is raw, unfiltered, and undeniably real. It allows us to assert our individuality and confront life on our own terms, no matter how destructive those terms might be. Think of the times you've clung to regret, stayed in a toxic relationship, or sabotaged opportunities for growth. Beneath these choices lies a subtle truth. Suffering, though painful, feels authentic. It validates our experience and gives it weight in a way happiness cannot. This dynamic plays out in modern life in countless ways. We glorify the struggle, whether through phrases like "no pain, no gain," or the subtle pride we take in enduring hardships. The Underground Man's resistance to happiness mirrors our own tendency to see joy as fleeting and fragile, while suffering feels permanent and defining. But why does this paradox persist? Why do we so often mistake pain for meaning and resist the very thing we claim to desire? Why are we so drawn to suffering? Dostoevsky suggests it's because pain, unlike happiness, feels like an act of rebellion. To suffer is to assert control over one's life, even if that control is self-destructive. For the Underground Man, suffering is a way to prove that he is not a puppet of society's expectations. In his mind, choosing pain is a declaration of freedom, a refusal to conform to the shallow comforts offered by a preordained life. This philosophy isn't as far removed from modern behavior as it seems. Think about procrastination, guilt, or unhealthy habits, choices we make that knowingly cause us harm. These actions, while frustrating, are oddly empowering because they reinforce the idea that no one controls us but ourselves. The Underground Man's claim, "If I suffer by my own hand, then no one else has power over me," highlights a universal human tendency to cling to pain as a misguided form of autonomy. Suffering then becomes seductive because it feels meaningful. It gives us a sense of depth, as if enduring hardship validates our existence. Consider how many people wear their struggles like badges of honor, as though pain alone justifies their worth. But Dostoevsky doesn't glorify this choice. he exposes its futility. The underground man's rebellion through suffering doesn't free him. It traps him in a cycle of bitterness and self-destruction. If suffering feels so empowering, why does it ultimately leave us empty? One of Dostoevsky's most provocative critiques in Notes from Underground is the idea that humans are not as rational as we like to believe. The underground man mocks the notion that logic and reason can fully explain human behavior. He argues that people often act against their own best interests, not because they are irrational, but because they crave freedom, even the freedom to make destructive choices. This defiance of logic is not a flaw. It's a defining feature of humanity. The underground man deliberately chooses chaos over a calculated, predictable life. To him, a life driven solely by reason is lifeless, a mechanized existence stripped of spontaneity and individuality. Dostoevsky's critique strikes a chord with modern dilemmas. How often do we make decisions that defy common sense, like pursuing a toxic relationship or taking unnecessary risks? These choices, though illogical, make us feel alive, as if they reaffirm our agency in a world that constantly seeks to categorize and control us. This tension between logic and desire plays out in our daily lives. From small indulgences like skipping the gym for comfort food to larger acts of rebellion like rejecting societal norms, we constantly defy reason to assert our individuality. The underground man embodies this struggle, exposing the illusion that humans can be purely rational creatures. His chaotic actions aren't failures of logic, they are triumphs of freedom. But this freedom comes at a cost, raising the question, can chaos ever lead to fulfillment, or does it always spiral into suffering? Dostoevsky doesn't glorify suffering, but he doesn't dismiss it either. In Notes from Underground, pain is not an end in itself, but a pathway to self-awareness. The underground man, through his relentless introspection, forces himself to confront the uncomfortable truths about his own weaknesses, fears, and contradictions. This self-awareness, born from suffering, offers a glimmer of redemption. It suggests that pain, while excruciating, can be transformative if we are willing to face it honestly. This idea resonates deeply with personal growth. Think of the times in your life when you've experienced the most profound changes. Were they not often preceded by moments of great pain or challenge? Whether it's the end of a relationship, a career setback, or a personal failure, these experiences compel us to look inward and reevaluate who we are and what we want. Like the underground man, we are often pushed to confront parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore, and through that confrontation, we can grow. But redemption through suffering requires more than enduring pain. It demands a willingness to learn from it. Dostoevsky suggests that suffering is a wake-up call, a sign that something within us needs to change. It's not about wallowing in misery, but about asking, what is this pain trying to teach me? The underground man's journey reminds us that while suffering is inevitable, it can also be a catalyst for transformation. But what happens when we deny suffering altogether, choosing instead the illusion of constant happiness? Dostoevsky warns that a world without suffering risks stripping us of our humanity. The underground man critiques the utopian ideals of his time, arguing that a life devoid of pain becomes shallow, mechanical, and ultimately meaningless. Suffering, he suggests, is what makes us deeply human. It forces us to feel, reflect, and grow. In today's relentless pursuit of happiness, this warning is more relevant than ever. The avoidance of discomfort through instant gratification or superficial positivity can numb us to life's deeper truths, leaving us disconnected from ourselves and others. Topic 8. Conclusion. Embrace the paradox, 13 o'clock, 14 o'clock. Suffering, as Dostoevsky shows us, is not an enemy but a paradox to be embraced. It is through pain that we grow, through struggle that we understand, and through discomfort that we find our truest selves. The challenge is not to escape suffering but to listen to it, to let it teach us what no happiness ever could. What if, instead of fearing pain, you started asking what it's trying to reveal about your life? Subscribe to this channel, and let's keep exploring the depths of human experience together, because understanding is the first step toward freedom.